invited me to kick off your workshop today. Just to give a little bit more detail, my own personal journey in enterprise architecture began just 15 or so years ago. I late in my own career, I decided to go back to university to do a PhD in enterprise modeling. I was doing my studies at a very similar time to Professor Asif, and we got to know each other during the course of our mutual interest in the topic, and we've had a great collaboration ever since. I went on to form a company called Capsify, where we built a software platform that implemented the models that I designed in my PhD, and that became an enterprise architecture tool. We were particularly focused on business architecture. And then late last year, we were acquired by Orbis Software. So now we're part of a bigger organization and still in the space of enterprise architecture. My focus right now is on research. So all the way through, we have had close collaboration with both UTS through Professor Asif Gill, and also through the university where I graduated at University of New South Wales, where we've sponsored PhD students with scholarships over the years, and a number of interns we've had from both of the universities. This year, we've got a current group that are doing absolutely amazing work, focusing on the use of AI to support enterprise architecture. Now, the topic I'm going to talk about today is almost like the extension of what I think is the future of enterprise architecture. And it's really coming about as a consequence, really, of the great technical capabilities we now have with AI agents to be able to do things with our enterprise architecture models that were unthought of before. And the whole concept is to really turn an architecture repository and a model of a business into an actual digital twin of the organization. And I'm going to try and explain what that is and why that's different to an architecture model and what the role of AI is in making that happen. So let's begin with a quick description of what is a digital twin. You may have heard of this topic before. It's become quite well known, and it's nothing really new. This has been around for nearly a decade now, the concept of creating a digital replica of some physical asset, an object, a person, a system, that can be rendered in a digital version of that thing. And primarily, these twins are used to simulate and perceive the real-time performance of those physical assets. And we, therefore, through this digital version of the thing that we're twinning, we can monitor its progress, we can interact with it, we can potentially make interventions in the operation of that asset, and have almost like a control panel through which that asset is managed. And if you're familiar with these industries, this is where it's been particularly successful. For any of you who might be Formula One fans, you would probably be familiar with the image of the pits crew who have those screens up in front of them, and they are monitoring the cars that are actually out on the track in real time, wherever they might be. They're up to the second performance of all aspects of the car, and how it's how it is progressing through the race. And they can actually take, as you well would understand, the interventions to interact with that car and make adjustments. The same thing would be the case in the airline industry with airplanes in flight. Crews back on the ground are able to monitor exactly the status of every aspect of the plane. And similarly, these sorts of technologies have been applied by government agencies in things like smart cities, traffic control, and so on. So this is just a small sample of those sorts of places where they've been successful so far. One of the things that you'll sort of see just from these images is that the user interface for digital twin is a kind of digital replica of the thing that we're actually creating a twin of, right? So you can, is in the plane, you can see the image of the plane and all of its functioning, and similarly, whatever it might be, the traffic network and so on. Now, we're starting to think about how to apply this concept of a digital twin to an organization. And that really is a very different thing to these asset-intensive industries. This is the first sort of change of that shift in thinking to take this idea of twinning something and apply it not to a physical asset, but to the complex social system that represented by an organization. And that really is what makes the digital twin of an organization somewhat different. And the question is, what is it exactly then that this thing would look like? How would we imagine a twin, the physical rendering of a twin of an organization? What is the image that comes to mind when you think of a bank or an insurance company? How do we model that in a way that we can produce a complete conceptual model of all the interactions and dynamics of the evolution of the organization? And obviously, the closest thing that we have to such a rendering is the architecture models and the tools that we create and the repositories that we as enterprise architects build that represent the dynamics of a business operation. So I hope that's starting to make sense then, why it's such a natural evolution that enterprise architecture should be the first and probably only space in which you might be able to think of that would support the digital twin of an organization. So what does it actually mean to, and what's different then? Is it that if we have an architecture repository and it has a rendering of all the content that represents the business operation, is that then already a digital twin? Well, no. So these are the things that we see being added incrementally to the architecture models to be able to create this digital twin concept. The first thing is we need to be able to start to present access to this thing to a much broader audience. There's not any longer a tool that's just available to the technical teams within IT, but we would need to be able to have dashboards and interact. This needs to become some sort of executive cockpit where there's real-time visualizations and dashboards available to executive teams that can monitor the performance of the organization, interact with that, pull the levers and to make the interventions to be able to change the way that the business operates and be alerted and receive real-time recommendations about it. So that's quite a different thing that our current architecture tooling provides. Secondly, we need access to the real-time performance of what's happening in the business. The architecture models represent the structure of and the dynamics of how the business works through the different modeling paradigms that we have, but they don't connect typically into the real-time transactional data. And so we need to add those connections in so that we can access what is actually happening with the transactions going through the architecture at this moment in time, see the performance and pass that information through. And then finally, we need to be able to then make scenario analysis of these models to be able to simulate options and allow the users to be able to predict and perceive how their possible interventions might play out and what the implications of those would be. So quite a lot of additional things then that we need to add to this content. And I'm going to try and explain how we're approaching this. But the first thing is to focus then on the architecture model itself. And this is something that we at Capsify, being a business architecture platform, we were really very focused on this topic all the way through. Our whole goal was to try to make architecture more accessible and meaningful to a broader audience within an organization than just the technology teams. And the idea that we had was to bring together all the various fragmented information that sits across an organization, and every different role has probably some different asset that they produce or artifacts that they use to explain their part of the business. And all of these are visual paradigms of the same, we're looking at the same elephant, but everybody's grabbing a different part of it. And none of them actually are connected and aligned. And all of these things sit in different places, and there's no traceability and impact analysis you can really do across these things unless we bring it all together and harmonize it. And that's really what we've been trying to do, to turn the operating model into an asset. Now, that is a really interesting thing. And what we often ask organizations when we see them for the first time, we say, well, where do you keep your operating model today? And I would pose that question to each of you, whichever organization you're in. Is there such a thing as a interactive, dynamic, incrementally evolving representation of the business operating model of the organization where you work or you study? The answer is absolutely probably no. We don't tend to think of the operating model as something tangible and that we could all access and interact with and get a clear picture of what is actually going on. And that's actually quite surprising when you think of it, because the operating model is really the most important asset that we have when you think of a strategic competitive advantage that organizations have against one another. It's how we operate and how we perform in the real world that is really drives the competitive differentiation. In fact, when you think of innovation and transformation programs, what are we actually innovating and transforming if it's not the operating model? But yet we don't have a commonly accepted, generalized perspective of what does even an operating model look like. If I was to ask everybody in the audience today to draw a picture of what comes to mind when I say the operating model, I'm sure we would all be drawing a different picture. And that's part of the problem. We don't have, how do we even know that the thing that we work, the place where we work, that we all have the same common view? And in fact, this picture, which was generated by fairly inept AI tool, as you can see, is kind of probably like the kind of vision that we have. It looks like it might make sense, but when you stop and really look at it, it's very unclear and opaque and not making much sense at all. And that's probably the collective vision that we mostly have of our own organizations. Nobody has a complete understanding of how things work, and we aren't all sure that we have the same perspective of how it works. So how then should we structure an operating model that if we want to turn it into a digital twin? Well, business architecture is a really good place to start. And the primary artifacts that a business architect works with are, number one, business capabilities. The business capability map is essentially an organized hierarchy of the building blocks of the business operating model. What is a capability map? It's a functional decomposition of everything that we do in an organization, breaking it down into more and more granular elements, where each of those boxes represents some composable unit of functionality that we have within a business. And that map explains everything that we need to be able to, all the resources that we need to assemble in these finite little Lego blocks that we can then collectively arrange and monitor and manage through the execution of our mission. It's a really good map and a really good structure for organizing things, but it can look and feel very abstract, especially when it's imposed on a business team. If somebody shows up, a business architect shows up and says, here's our business capability model, and expects them to see themselves in that and make sense of it, it can be a little challenging. Until you take those capabilities and you put them into what we call value streams. And value streams are really the other major artifact that business architects create. Value streams, what are they? Well, they're very simple structures. We call them scaffolds for simply representing the stages that you go through in your major stakeholder interactions. Then they're unlike a process in that a process is all focused on the flow logic of how these stages progress. The value stream doesn't have the flow logic. It simply acts as an organizing structure, and we hang off of each stage the business capabilities that support the stage. And suddenly these capabilities, which are pulled from the collective capability map, start to make sense because you can see how they're used in action, and this little simple structure becomes the organizing framework for the operating model. Every part of the business has a number of value streams which they support, and for each value stream, if we have a canvas like this, we can start to use this as our window into the operating model. And the capabilities, what are they? These abstract things that represent what we do. Well, they act as the anchor points for connecting up all the other knowledge repository artifacts that I explained on the previous page. All that fragmented knowledge gets mapped to the capability that it actually enables or supports. One of the primary organizing dimensions we use for this operating model knowledge is this concept called people, process, information, technology. So all of the people, process, and information technology artifacts and catalogs of information that we create get mapped in here. These are not things in their own right, like these are categories of information. So let's say in the people dimension, we would have the roles, the skills, the business teams that are supporting that capability. And similarly in the process, in the information and technology space, all the various elements that we bring together to enable that capability. That's really what a capability is, the bringing together of these resources to enable the capability. But that's not all we can map into these things. We can map all kinds of other things. In fact, once we have something like this in place, this scaffold acts as the organizing structure now for all of our things. Requirements can be mapped in there, initiatives, projects, strategies, goals, policies, controls. Think of all of the ways you can tap them in and align them to where those things apply in this particular view of how the business is functioning. And if we were to do some innovation or transformation on this particular value stream, imagine there's an initiative that says, we want to now try and optimize this. One of the first things that we would do would be to do an assessment of the maturity. How well is everything functioning right now? Maybe we do that through a survey. That's one of the simplest ways of doing a maturity assessment, is to ask the people who actually support this value stream, say, how well do you think the maturity of these capabilities are right now at this point in time? And maybe we go do it at this level of the PPIT. How good are the people skills and roles and so on? How great is the process functioning? What about the information and technology? Where do they fit on a maturity scale? And so you get this perspective immediately of where there might be maturity gaps that you would want to address with your transformation initiative. And that's even still just the beginning, because for all of those red boxes, which are obviously the ones that we would want to focus in on, we can go to the next stage and we could say, well, you've told me that there's a maturity gap there, but what's the actual pain points that you're feeling? And this is where we could have our pain point workshop, our innovation workshop, where people are putting Post-it notes onto the canvas, interactive canvas here of this value stream. And suddenly those Post-it notes are capturing the anecdotal evidence of what pains they feel as they go through this interaction with their customers, and where they've got issues with information or issues with technology that gives us the color to really understand what we need to address. Maybe then from there, we go into the next round of the workshop, which is the ideation stage, and say, well, you would be the best people to tell us how to fix that. What ideas do you have to address those pain points? And suddenly we've started to get the potential scope of change emerging out of these workshops. And it's all tied into exactly which part, and it persists in the repository. This knowledge is tied to those capabilities, and it sits there until we address them. And the next step would be to take those ideas and prioritize and organize and scope them and put the requirements for them and feed them to the delivery teams and so on, as you can see. And as they get delivered, we can we can track back to all the sprints and the epics and the work packages that people are working on would be tied back to these capabilities, and we'd be able to monitor how they're going. And that then represents this enduring. We actually move from project-centric big change transformation initiatives towards enduring ongoing optimization of value streams. And we move from project-centric thinking to continuous improvement thinking across these value stream owners. And budgets start to be aligned around value streams rather than around projects. And change is a continuous exercise. This is the nirvana and the dream. So you can see all of this coming together, how we would run transformation. We'd have our value streams and our capabilities, our people, process, information, technology, and being the categories of information. And there we get the actual catalogs that we would be looking at underneath those. And all of that sits in the context of what? Some other great strategic plan where we have our goals and objectives, what we call desired results, the strategies and tactics, which are the courses of action. So what we want to achieve, how we're going to do that, how we're going to govern ourselves. And this is all governing the operating model. And downstream, we have the delivery teams, which are following their agile methodology, this machinery of change, just running through sprint after sprint and picking up features from the backlog and working them through. Not really that worried about exactly what it is they're changing. They just go and look at the backlog. And it's our job as transformation teams to actually feed the backlog with the right stuff. And so you can see the alignment starting to come here between strategy and execution, strategy and delivery, delivery and execution. So that our transformation program, what does it do? It's got this now, you can see all of this. This is essentially the ontology of the business operation, right? So as we run a program of change, we have a new initiative, we build a plan, we set a business roadmap of the timeline that we want to achieve that. We perhaps get the budget allocations, and we get the business outcomes tied to the strategies and tactics that we want that align to the business strategy. So this particular initiative has some outcomes. And then, hallelujah, epiphany. Every initiative has a one-to-one relationship with the value stream that initiative is impacting. So rather than just jumping over to delivery and starting to put a roadmap together of time and budget and resources, we start instead to look at, well, what actually is happening in that part of the business? So we do our maturity assessments of the value stream and the pain points and ideas as I went through, and we come up with new feature enhancements that we want to make to the operating model, and we then package those features up into epics and user stories and work packages that we feed the backlog. And that means that the repository of architecture content is also a repository of a tool for change and a methodology for managing transformation through this thing. And that really illustrates the plan. This is exactly, in fact, how our tool works. This is the user interface of our tool. And you can drill into any of these visualizations through the tool. It's not just a concept map or ontology of what's in the tool, but it's also this methodology guidance. And I can drill through to the value streams and choose, in this example from a banking customer, the various value streams and choose a value stream and see the value stream with its heat maps and so on and connected knowledge all coming together. So this is a reality. This is not new. This is what modern enterprise architecture tooling does today. So how then do we take it from here and move it into the digital twin world? Well, I'm going to illustrate that with a small, quick example. This is how we are starting to apply this to ourselves. Our company, being a SaaS software vendor, our primary value stream is our sales pipeline. And these stages that you see here are the stages that we go through as a software business in selling our product to our customers. And in fact, we use Salesforce as our sales management tool. And these are the stages of the sales pipeline in Salesforce. If you go into our version of Salesforce, our implementation of it, these are all the steps that our sales teams use. Now, what we've done is we've mapped underneath each of these stages the business capabilities that we need to address that stage, right? As you typically would do in any given value stream. And so here we have our own internal business capabilities, which we're running assessments on these ourselves and understanding where we have gaps and maturity issues across these various things. And we use this to enhance the business. And of course, we have all of this in our own tool that we can monitor and manage our own sales pipeline. Now, one of the things that we have started to do with this is to use AI agents to figure out what we could do to optimize and enhance the value stream. And one of the first things we said was, well, tell us what are the things that we should be measuring across this sales pipeline? What are the key metrics that should be mapped into each of these stages and in fact into each of these business capabilities? And the tool, the agents came up with this, something like 65 odd metrics that it suggested, mapped into the business capabilities. Each metric described there by how you calculate the metric, right? And in fact, it even gave us, we went one step further and asked for the actual formula for how you calculate that metric. Because we use Salesforce for running these, for storing all of the information, the metrics are actually a function of the data that's in the Salesforce tool. And so what we've been able to do is grab the transaction logs from Salesforce. I thought I had a picture of a transaction log, but unfortunately it's fallen out from my slide deck. But a transaction, the event log is really just a table of every new change that happens to Salesforce by any salesperson or any other user of the Salesforce application. It creates a row in this table and says who changed it, what did they change, when did they change it, what was the old value, what's the new value, and we can log every single change. And so the integration isn't even really an API. It's really just reading from this log, which is constantly being updated as users make changes. And so from that table, we can find the attributes that form part of these metrics, and we can do the calculations on those attributes. And so what we can do is within our tool, we've now got the metrics here that I just showed you linked into the capabilities. And then each of these metrics, we can see whether those metrics are being achieved or not. And when we have issues with any of those metrics, we can drill right through and get the real-time calculation of how we're doing against that particular metric. And so the tool, the repository of architecture, becomes not just a mechanism for organizing your architectural content, explaining the operation and managing all of your architecture knowledge, but it also becomes a performance monitoring tool so that we can access exactly how our performance is happening in real time with the actual opportunities that are transiting through this sales pipeline right up to the minute, and see which metrics we're failing on and what we need to do to make those changes. So giving our executive team this interactive dashboard on what levers to pull to optimize our operation. So Asif, I'm going to pause it there for questions, or at least make sure that everybody's still there. I don't see anybody, and I hope I haven't been talking to myself for the last half an hour. But if you are all still there, I would be very happy to hear any reactions to that and see if anybody has any questions.
No, thank you, Jerry. We are listening to you, and the room is full, so just gonna move around if you want to see the room. But yeah, people are there to hear.
Oh,
just
wonderful!
It's a very manual way, not a digital twin, but as we do. Okay, we have a question. Anybody has any question? A comment? Yeah, we have first one, Mitri.
very excited, and if I would be a manager, I would be happy having such a dashboard for my company. But on the other hand, I think that it requires a lot of time and effort to create such a digital twin, to model all capabilities, define all the metrics, collect data for all the metrics, do it regularly, and so on. So, do you have any approach for kind of assessing kind of this balance between investments in this modeling and benefits from this modeling?
That's
Return-
yeah, I got the question. I did, and I think it's a fantastic one. And in fact, it's probably the topic that I should have spent a little bit more on, which is the answer to your question is that the primary mechanism for helping to address that exact problem is the wonderful opportunity that we have with AI. So the question that you've raised is in fact one of the most challenging problems that we have as business architects is the time that it takes to build these models, right? And I fully agree with exactly your point that it's a very time-consuming and laborious exercise to build these capability maps, to consolidate all of the information across an organization and bring it together. Now, what we have found is that AI agents are absolutely fantastic at doing that. So I've just opened up another slide deck and I'm about to share with you an image here. Just give me 1 second. Do I have it here? Yeah. I believe I'm showing the right screen. Yeah. So this is a supplementary to the digital twin work that we're doing. This is where our thinking that we're doing on applying artificial intelligence across the spectrum of AI, across the spectrum of how enterprise architecture users actually manage their practice, right? And this is meant to be read sort of from left to right, starting from the generation of content in your architectural models and having agents that can extract content from unstructured artifacts, or that you can actually give them some parameters like what industry are you in, what region are you in, what's your business model, how big are you, and what type of competitors you have, and so on. And the agents will then generate for you a custom capability map, for example, or custom process catalog, or a custom application portfolio for that particular set of parameters. So that first stage in model generation was one of the first places that we've been focusing on. The next one is integration and extracting knowledge from the various other repositories around the organization where that knowledge needs to come from. Augmenting that information where there are gaps by being able to, for example, map capabilities to applications or processes to applications and propose that the agents are really good at being able to take these disparate fragmented knowledges and trying to suggest to you how they might align, or where you have gaps in some of your knowledge areas to suggest possible fit for those gaps. Moving then into the decision support and guidance and helping you use the knowledge that you have, and then really get into the advanced diagnostics, predictive analytics, and predictive scenario analysis and so on. So that's our current, this represents our opportunity spectrum and where we're working right now on delivering this stuff. But the long-winded answer to your question is, AI is taking us on a whole new journey and making the possibility of you getting to these really complex models and having them applicable to your organization, making it a much more realistic for the average organization.
Thank you. And we have any other question in the room? Okay. Maybe you're going to come a little bit closer. You're going to come here. Are you going to come here? Okay. I think we don't have a mic in the room. That's right. You can come closer. Yep. Okay. Please ask your question.
Yeah. So my question was on the name of this, which is an opportunity spectrum, but have you also created the challenge spectrum? meaning the opposite, namely to take an example of this agentic AI, which is supposed to help with the fragmented nature of different assets in the organization. To say, okay, they're about the same thing, for example, but how can you trust that what the AI says is about the same thing is actually about the same thing, especially sometimes regarding the lack of transparency of that. So what are the challenges that come with it? Next to the
definitely. And so the challenge, some of the challenges that we have faced. Okay, so one of the first things that we did, I was asked to try and help put together some content for an industry which we'd never actually worked with before. In this particular case, it was a media company. Oh, do you have a business architecture model for a media company? Can you build one of those for that? Get AI to do it for us. And this is when we were just starting to experiment with AI. So I went and I started the question. I said, okay, tried my little prompts. I said, you're a business architect, and we'd like you to build a capability map for a media organization and a set of value streams and the value stream stages, and then map the stages to the capabilities and then build it. So that was just the beginning. And did a beautiful job. It gave me all this content in Excel sheets that were all looked pretty good, and we loaded it up. And I showed it to someone. Oh, great! And then we said, well, let's show me how you did it. So we tried again. I said, tell me. And guess what it did? It gave me a completely different set of information. Oh, let's try it again, and a different set of information. And I started to realize that actually, what it was when I kept asking the same question, it was feeling that I didn't like the answer before, so I tried a different answer, right? Which is obviously not at all what we wanted, right? We needed to have definitive proposal, right? So we started to get better and better at this, and we realized, no, what we have to do is we have to actually train these things to understand what the classes of things are that we're asking them to construct. So, for example, we now have specialized agents for all the different class types that we ask it to build. So we have a capability agent. A capability, then we teach it. We say, all right, what is a capability? Or a business capability. We give it the definition. We have some semantics. We say capabilities are grounded in a business object. All right. Capabilities must exhibit MISI. They must be mutually exclusive, and the map must be collectively exhaustive. All right. Capabilities will be aligned into value stream stages. And if you've got capabilities that don't fit a stage, or stages that don't have capabilities, they have to be. So we all of these things together start to teach the agents what they have to do, and they become better and better at it. And so we've got to a point now where we're getting really good quality models out of each of these agents with their specialized understanding of what the content is that they need to produce. That's one example of some of the challenges that we've had, and we're working through it. It's every time there's a new release of a new LLM, the quality of what we receive improves, and we learn ourselves. We've got 2 of our students right now that we sponsor with scholarships for the PhDs are working on prompting for these particular pieces. One of them, the other example that I gave that we're doing, one of the other students is working on taking unstructured documents, particularly working on, let's say, a business strategy document, which we can often get from publicly available websites or even annual reports, and go through the documents and extract information. So identify a goal, identify objectives, identify strategies and tactics, and map goals to strategies, to tactics, to objectives, because each of these things have a very specific definition that we can determine from the phrase, the structure of the sentence, whether it's a policy because it's got a deontic expression, and it's an objective because it's got time-based and measurable, and all these things together. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. Let me put it that way. We haven't solved everything, and we're uncovering more and more solutions to these problems. But the speed and the pace at which it happens, and the the impact that this thing creates in getting very quickly to really good quality content is quite astounding.
Thank you, Terry. It was noted here. That's a question was answered. We have any other questions? I think Renata, you have it. Renata, you want to come over here so the mic can hear you?
Well, I have.
Here we go, Renata. Here we go.
Hi.
Let me put
Hi.
Well,
if you want to put the camera on as well.
yeah, amazing talk so far, Terry. Thank you.
Thank
I was wondering what kind of modeling languages do you apply? Because I see a lot of connections with enterprise architecture, right? Like if you take Archimate, then you have all these concepts like strategies and capabilities and goals. So I wonder what kind of modeling languages you use.
So our let's call it, rather than modeling language, I'd say our meta model, right, which is the concepts and the classes and the semantics of how these models put together. That actually came from the framework that I designed in my PhD. It's an ontology. It's an enterprise ontology. It's very similar in structure to Archimate, and it aligns to Archimate. We can convert Archimate models into this framework. But ours is based on a semantic ontology using RDF, which is a W3C standard, and OWL. So it's basically a graph, a knowledge graph, and the graph has about 240 classes of thing. And the classes are linked to class, linked to class, to class. We use Spark queries to query the graph. And in fact, it's what ends up happening when you build ontologies. I think I'll just give a brief sideline on my sales pitch for ontologies, because I just love the concept. Right? It's such this expressive, intelligent representation of the dynamics of a business. When you put your knowledge into an ontology, you're actually embedding intelligence into the data structure itself. The query, you just query it, and then you get your answers from that. And what there's actually been some really interesting research on how when you provide a AI agent with the ontology of the domain that you're asking it to query,
Reason about,
yeah, that helps it immensely, because the general mechanism that they use is sort of language association and trained on reading examples and examples. So it's a sort of an empirical perspective. It's based on reading lots and lots and lots of instance data to sort of derive patterns. Ontological views is much more a rational imposition of what the domain looks like. And when you give it that additional understanding of the domain, the quality of the response is greatly improved. So it's a really nice bringing together of AI ontologies with this that has really created a very fertile and super way, I think, of building these models.
Very cool. I don't know your ontology. Does it have a name?
Yeah, it's called the Capsicum Framework.
Capsicum Framework. Okay.
Capsicum Framework. That was my original.
I'll look for it.
Okay, good. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Well, I asked another question, Terry. Maybe I was thinking that if you can relate to the agents and enterprise knowledge graph work, I think the people are doing over there, the students, and how the agents are using the knowledge as ontology stored in enterprise knowledge graph. So maybe a couple of points on that, Terry, so people can link the agents to the knowledge graph.
Yeah. Well, so the great thing about ontology is it basically just means it's the connectedness, the whole of the whole. So it's created a really fertile area where over the years we've had, I think, nearly a dozen different students, and each of them is able to come into a different part of the ontology and really hone in and focus on it. So like I was saying, one of the girls right now is working on strategy documents, getting that extracted. We've previously had folks on things like maturity assessments. So that was the topic that one of the previous students spent her entire PhD on. You know, and it's all just this connected understanding of the relationships between fragmented information and how it all comes together. So every single one of the contributions just adds to the previous. There's still, I would say we haven't even scratched the surface. There's so much opportunity in this idea that, you know, when we began, we kind of thought to ourselves, if we could build a well enough defined semantic model of an organization, it should actually be executable, right? And that's been perhaps a little bit of the sort of nirvana of enterprise architects since before my time was, you know, imagine we could create executable models. I think that's what these, that's what we're sort of driving towards now. Like if you look at that example that I was showing you earlier with the sales pipeline, and we're showing the opportunity making its way through those stages, and then we're actually accessing the data itself from the application. But actually, you know, when you think of it, within the model, we have a model of the data. We know what attributes there are for an opportunity, and we know the logic of how those attributes change state and as they progress through the process of, you know, opportunity management. And we are capturing all of this information in the tool. Well, you know, it's only one more step to go insert data here, put the opportunity data in, and the model becomes the application. I think that's where we're going, right? Where all of these things just converge as you add more and more semantic intelligence, and we bring the logic into these consolidated perspectives. We are on that trajectory. I'm not proposing that that's where we're at now at all, but it's certainly where we're going. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. I think we can have maybe one question more before we wrap up. Anybody has a question? I think Zoran has a question for you, Terry. I'm going to pass it to Zoran.
Yes.
Hi, Terry. I'm quite familiar with Capsicum from many years ago. We did work with Fatty, if you remember.
Yes, I do. Good to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, sure. Look, I was just going to ask you, in terms of orchestration of those AI agents.
Yes.
Do you predominantly do in what you're doing based on human who is orchestrating the work of agents, or do you think of possibly bringing in the orchestrator agent that the supervisor is going to monitor, I guess? So my question is, where do you see shift in human in the loop in the context of multi-agent systems?
Absolutely. So, you know, if I'll explain a little bit more about this spectrum here. So above this dotted line are what we call the use cases, right? And the use cases are organized into this sort of sequential spectrum of from beginning to end of the usage of an EA tool. Below the line are what we have as the technology enablers for those use cases, right? So these are what we're actually building. These are the components, the AI components of our architecture. But if you come over here to the right, these are the organizing AI capabilities through which all of this is being presented to the user. And there's three elements here. Semantic search, I don't even know perhaps if that's in the right place here, but there's two primary things here. The multi-agent orchestration, right, which I think you just sort of touched on, which is, you know, at this moment in time, I think we're only just scratching the surface of how advanced these things can become in the overarching organization of this stuff into a continuous history and a contextualization of all the things that you've done with the user to get to where you're at. There's all kinds of really fascinating opportunities there to bring all these independent agents together into a more intelligent whole. And so there's a lot of work we're doing to try and get to the bottom of that. But the other important thing is exactly your point of the human in the loop. Is the interface with the human, and this is this AI Copilot, a little panel that will come out, and it's contextual to every screen. It understands the user, who they are, their preferences, their history, their role in the organization, their ownership of different elements within the architecture repository, the content that they've authored, and when they're, and so on and so on. All of that context means that every user gets their own personalized perspective of the how they interact with the knowledge that's there, and the different sort of prompts and reminders and suggestions and recommendations are contextualized within this AI Copilot. But then all of these features that I'm showing here with these use cases are also accessed through this Copilot. So this becomes the way through which the users primarily are interfacing with it, but with the huge leaning on the power of this multi-agent. So it's a dual mechanism there, not one or the other is what but it's the combination of the two that's vital to the whole thing. Yeah.
Right, and just follow on question, in terms of AI agents, you did hint it is very much LLM based agents, is that right?
Yes, primarily at this point, that's what we've been doing. But it's so one of the most challenging things about this is that your plans that you have today get thrown out of the window tomorrow, because we're at the pace at which these things change. You suddenly discover all those things that you thought were going to be amazing and great. You're going to build all this incredible integration capability that you've designed from beginning to end, and somebody comes up with the concept of an MCP server, and it doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly.
So yeah.
So what's your preferred LLM agent technology, if you have one that you're happy to share?
Yeah, we are. So I think surprisingly, we've been very impressed with GPT-5. I know most people haven't, but we found that it was really, really good at the beginning to understand the semantics of what we were doing. And I think that's a bit more subtle than what people were expecting. I think the hallucination levels and the consistency of the models improved a lot. That said, Claude has got, when you ask Claude to build a model, it somehow just feels more real. I don't know.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So those have been my two favorites. And we often you can ask one to validate the other, which is quite interesting. And we're learning which way around to do that. And yeah. In fact, I don't know if any of you have been using in the last month or so, I've been using Cursor, and it has just completely blown my mind as to the potential. And when we look at how they've built a tool for coding and just turning the ability to write code into just how good you are at interacting with the LLM, really. I mean, of course, I'm sure this whole vibe coding concept has got its flaws, but the little experiments that I've done have just blown my mind. And when I think that's really what we need to, what has that done? It's demystified coding, and it's made coding accessible to a much, much broader audience. That's exactly what we're trying to do with our models too. We want to make architecture accessible to non-architects. Not everyone in an organization aspires to be an architect, but they all need to understand the dynamics and the performance of the operating model and how to monitor it. So we need to make these things more accessible. And I think we're seeing some great parallels with the way some of these other tools are evolving. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Terry.
You're very much, Ron. Terry, right, we are at the clock, I think, and I think we should thank you for such an insightful discussion. And really, thank you very much. And yeah, I think we'll look forward to have you back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. Good luck with your rest of your workshop. Thank you, guys. Maybe I'll be
Thank you very much.
next time.
Thank you.